Thank you for all coming. First of all, is anyone here from Trendiction in the audience? No? Okay. Well, I would like to specifically thank them as the gold sponsor. Yes? Did somebody say no? I would like to particularly thank Trendiction for sponsoring the workshops today. So if you do see someone from Trendiction, please say a thank you to them. Okay. So today's workshop is all focused on monetizing content, how our paths are more aligned than you think. And we have with us from both sides, both the consumers of content as well as publishers. So that's who you'll be hearing about today. If I didn't introduce myself, I'm Dawn Conway, and I'm EVP with Cision, responsible for licensing and customer experience. And I'm also the chair of the Copyright and Content Committee for AMIC. So monetizing content. The recent survey that was done last year by AMIC, it was the CEO survey that was completed, and content is critical. So content to this industry is extremely critical. Customers are asking for it, they're demanding insights, they need content, and we need to address the business models now. I've been in this business of licensing for quite a few years, and the model has not changed since when I started in like the late 90s. And prior to joining Cision, I was with LexisNexis, so very familiar with licensing content. And we still have yet to figure out what the right model is. Publishers need to monetize their content, customers are demanding the insights, and those in the media monitoring space need the content to do our jobs. And the model, one thing that is missing, and I'm hoping that we will address part of that today with the panel, is around the client. Licensing is not just about the media monitoring organization and the publisher, it also needs to include the client. And that's where I think we may find a different value from what the client is willing to pay, or what the value to the publisher of the tremendous client base that we bring to those publishers through the media monitoring services that we offer. So I'm hoping that we keep the client front and center in our discussions today. So with that, I just wanted to give a quick, brief update on what's happening, at least in North America, around content trends. And then we'll hear from each of our panelists. So the paywall was the big word of 2012. I think in 2013, there was a quote from Neiman's Lab Justin Ellis: if 2012 was the year of the paywall for American newspapers, 2013 is turning into the year of paywall tinkering. So paywall is not just something that is fleeting, it's here to stay. They're just still trying to figure out the model. So nearly a quarter of all the US and Canadian newspapers have implemented paywalls. In Canada, all of the major newspapers have paywalls now. Magazines and influential bloggers are doing the same thing. I just heard Andrew Sullivan talk about how his content, he's a very influential blogger, he's thinking about going behind a paywall because they need to figure out how to monetize their content. So it's just not newspaper content going behind the paywall. Newsright, which was an organization, an RRO, reproductive rights organization, this was something that was created in the US a couple years ago to aggregate the rights of newspaper publishers so that it would make it easy and one-stop shop for companies like media monitoring companies to access content and to license that content. Unfortunately, Newsright, the model did not work for them, and they chose to exit that business. However, Moreover did purchase the name and are working within the parameters of what Newsright was doing. But again, it just shows, at least at that point of Newsright, we thought it might be an answer to the paywall. It wasn't the answer to the paywall. They didn't have the model right. AP versus Meltwater, this is the Associated Press. This is really more around litigation. The last thing media monitoring companies want to do is engage in litigation. We want to do the right thing. The industry wants to do the right thing. Therefore, with publishers, our paths are aligned. This isn't a publisher versus monitoring company. if you aren't familiar with the AP Meltwater decision, the decision was in favor of the AP. The AP, their lead, which is the URL, and then the lead to the snippet is copyrightable. You do have to pay for AP. AP is different in that its lead is usually the full context of the story, so it was deemed to be substitutable for full text. So in that case, AP won the case. And competitive exclusives. This is also happening, I think this is happening globally, but particularly in the broadcast space where certain aggregators of broadcast are doing exclusive deals. This makes it more difficult for the industry to acquire content. So with that, those are just a few of the trends of what's happening in North America, but in summary, it really is that copyright has become so complicated, and media monitoring companies want to work with publishers, they want to do the right thing, and they need to provide this content to their customers. So how do we get to the right models? So our first panelist today, and I'm joined by a distinguished panel today, John Kroll, who's the CEO of Isentia, and he will begin. Also next to him is Irene Lesenko, who is with the Spanish Newspaper Association, IDIC. Next to her is Andrew Hughes, who is the president of PDLN and the commercial director for NLA from the UK. And next to Andrew is Susanna Tecca, who is with, she's the manager in the licensing department for Cedro. So with that, I'll turn it over to John.
Thanks, Dawn. There's a lot of comments that I concur with Dawn, just as she spoke. She did her first agreement in the 1990s. I remember signing my first copyright agreement in 1996, and we're talking about the same issues still. So it's enormously exciting for me to think that we've come this far in this amount of time. So I've spoken about it as an aligned but complex relationship. I do believe we need to work together and we need to work strongly together, but our business models are changing quite rapidly, and the complexity is becoming, through this time of transition, of how each of those models work. And I'm going to try to explain that from my part of the region and what I see with our clients. But to me, I think it's incredibly important that we do put the client center, and that's, I really thought Dawn's comments were absolutely spot on. So to me, they're changing rapidly, the client's needs, and the pricing model and the way that we work with the publishers or the content creators isn't changing as quickly. So, the first point I've made there is just provide the first instance. What we're seeing more and more with syndicated content and duplicated content is the client is saying, I don't need to see it multiple times. I just want the first time you see it, online or in a newspaper is absolutely fine. But if the story changes, I want that. I only want the changes to that story. And I don't need to be bombarded with the volume anymore, but I need the metadata. So I want to know the instances, but just don't show me the clip, don't show me the video clip, give me the metadata to it. So it's becoming a very interesting place where we're working with our content creators that they want a price for every piece of content that we send to our clients. But really, they only want to know the story once and then get that metadata. And I've put accurate audience data because I think that's becoming the next really important piece, and where we can be aligned with our content creators is that the amount of information that they're now creating in their online businesses and knowing who's visiting and who's behind the paywall and what the demographic is, that is becoming increasingly important to the client base. The additional comments, I think when you look online, and from our client's point of view, there might be a very, very positive story, something that they've worked hard for the placement of that story. But the comments that have been added online to that story could be critical or could be more important to the client. And at the moment, in the way that we scrape, we may scrape that story once, but how can we work with our content creators to get those additional comments and keep that story completely updated to where it is? And the photo and video libraries. So The newspaper may have had that one shot, but now with the online environment, we've got multiple pictures, we may have a video story, we may have additional interview with the person who actually was the main source for that story. So for me, it's moving away from a clip to all the other pieces of information or content that are aligned to that single piece of information that started the story. And with integrated services, with the social and with the traditional media, mainstream media, we all know that our clients' needs are increasing for speed. So we need to understand that content management system that's working for the publisher. We need to be able to work with the updates to let the client know extremely quickly what's happening. And from a scraping environment or from a just only wanting those additional comments, it takes too long to filter out. It takes too long for us to sort. So for us, how do we get that online access in a speed that can be very valuable for our clients? And the content model as we've got at the moment is every piece of information that we send to the client, there is a price put to that piece of information. It doesn't matter if it's the same piece of content that's been put into a newspaper or syndicated to many newspapers, but then our clients can't understand if we give them the online story at the moment, there's no copyright to it at all. I mean, that's obviously coming, and we welcome it coming. We're actually happy to work with the publishers to create that relationship to work in that way. But there's so many differences in the way that content is delivered to an audience now, but we're priced with a newspaper at a premium, where arguably the online story with a larger audience and delivered closer to the time of the actual event is a more important piece of information for our client. I've said media relationships are complex, they certainly are. And look, for a decade in Australia and New Zealand, we had an excellent time with our content creators. And I don't say just publishers, broadcasters are in the same space here. It was very, very much a win-win relationship. We worked on projects together to see if we could generate more content or more revenue together. And we made a very simple environment for the client to pay. Really, we invoiced, we reported, we did all the collections and all the administration for the publishers, and they needed to audit and provide us with the content. So on that time, 80% of the content was delivered in a digital format, so the scanner became something of the past. We worked on metadata relationships that we could actually rely on, and we had an incredibly good relationship over that period of time. And I think we created a fair return for the publishers as well. Something where they would come to us and say, are there ways that we can work in a better way, John, to make some more money out of this? So to me, it worked extremely well for a decade. Now it's under stress because of the different models that Dawn spoke about in the start there, that the subscription model, the paywall model, how do you actually work with us when we're wanting to get behind the paywall, but we don't want to pay the same price as a press clip? And we may arguably take away some of your paywall subscriptions, arguably. So the business models on both sides are stressed at the moment around how do you pay and how do our clients want to pay for this service. And it's extremely difficult now to get attention from the publishers when there's so much going on inside their organisation. And so at the same time as when they're trying to work out their business model, we're asking, we want the metadata, we want to be behind the paywall, we want to get your content management system syndication data so we can understand where you're pushing that story to. We want to pick up the commentary and any Twitter handles that may be aligned with that story. And where I'm talking about alignment of the Twitter handle, I'm talking about the television program and the Twitter stream that they run on screen at the same time. To me, again, that's a very influential piece of content that's very important to our client base. And we're looking for global standards. There's no use for us having a newspaper that we can keep for 90 days and deliver to a client in Australia when the online content can be distributed to anybody anywhere in the world and is available much closer to the time of the story. So what is our approach in this space? We've always absolutely respected the content creators and their investment. We come from a position that we use their content and we should pay for it, and we've always been in that situation. We're owned by private equity, so from a position of actually adding value for our business, copyright is one of the most important pieces of the organisation, because there is no business without content being properly licensed and us using it in the proper way. Our biggest thing that we always talk to our content creators, to publishers especially, is we are a trusted channel to corporate and government clients. It used to be in my bonus scheme and all the executive schemes, if we had a break in copyright or did something that wasn't right to our licenses, and that was in that year, all global bonuses for the executive team were off. That's how seriously we had it inside our business, and that's how serious we showed that we were a very, very good channel for publishers to rely on us just to corporate and government clients. We keep it simple. We make the rights easy to understand for our clients, easy to administer at a reasonable cost and with reasonable access. So to me, it will only work if it's an environment where the client can understand very easily what's happening. The publisher doesn't need to know our business model to a huge degree. That's probably changing. And it's easy to administer, so we don't all spend a lot of money on the collection and the distribution of those reports. We don't agree on exclusive agreements, would never do one. It's in no one's interest. It breaks down the aggregation model of what we do. There has been a number of court cases starting in Australia around agreements that are exclusives. So that's a part of the stress and the tension that I'm talking about. Publishers should not saddle themselves, in my opinion, with big administration, compliance or rights management costs. We can manage that for them. We know the information that we send, and with the right models you can do that for them. We always believe the clients will pay if the system works for them, and that's worked extremely well for us over the 10 years that we've had it. And we need pricing structures that are flexible with the industry in transition. So the per-click model that's done extremely well over many years is now dead in the water. We need more flexibility around the pricing. And even though Dawn was probably signing these in the 1990s, it's more of a revenue share model against the whole of the invoice for us is the best way to go. So a very quick update, which was part of the brief. Australia and New Zealand, we've had standard agreements in a place for a long time. We're having positive discussions in licensing online news and paywalls at the moment. We see that as an advantage. We want to actually have good agreements with the content creators to get behind the paywalls. Pricing is not meeting the market at the moment in both its price and its structure, and we can talk about that more. Some exclusives and some legal action in Australia, which is new for us after 10 years. In Southeast Asia, the media companies are growing, so it's interesting in the other markets that we actually operate, the actual market's growing quite quickly. So the media companies are producing more newspapers, more content, journalists are being employed. So it sounds pretty different to every other place in the world. And licensing starting in Southeast Asia with good flexible agreements, because we've had the experience of being able to put them together for the new world. But it's still, I wouldn't say it's got a lot of momentum behind it. China, largest newspaper market in the world and growing rapidly. There's 127 evening newspapers in China alone, so it's a massive market. It's a difficult licensing environment. People either want an exclusive or they have no interest at all. And so for us, that's a very difficult discussion to have. Hong Kong's inflexible with its licensing. It's, they really don't even still want you to put it into a portal. They just want you to send it via email or by the post, which is, we're a long way behind. And the client interest is very low in compliance. So where most markets that we operate, clients are very interested to know that they're doing the right thing or want to know the right thing. There's not that same compliance in the China marketplace. So I'm done. So thank you very much.
Thank you, John. Any questions for John at the moment? I do have a question. Clearly, you heard the definition of content is changing, and so there's different values around whether it's metadata, it's a snippet, it's full text, and there's also, you heard loud and clear, take copyright seriously. Do you, in terms of the variety of content, the metadata, the comments, the Instagram, all the other various media types of content, are you addressing them with different models, or is it still, you talked about RevShare, are there any other models that you have worked with publishers of this content on?
Mainly in the Australian New Zealand marketplace at the moment. It's turning into a rev share discussion more than... So we've had a per item charge and a downstream charge in the Australian market. Downstream's been fantastic because clients can distribute it freely and openly for 90 days to 300 people in their organisation. So, but at the moment, how do you price for comments on the end of that story? So we've already paid for that piece of content in one part. Is it one piece of content or is that a new piece of content? So at the moment, you're getting down to the complexity of how do you price a single instance? And for us, that's getting too difficult for a client to actually start pricing in, well, I'll take the comments or not. So at the moment, we're going to percentage of revenue.
And it's an important point. I've met with a lot of clients who say, why am I paying for content twice? I already subscribe. So the fact that I already have a direct subscription, can't you just leverage my subscription as my agent who's doing the monitoring on my behalf? So also, in addition to what John just said, clients are also asking, how many times am I paying for this piece of content? Andrew.
Am I allowed to ask a question? Well, maybe.
Sure, go ahead.
I was just going to ask how you kind of square the circle between CEOs in your survey saying content and access to content is the most important thing, and everyone making the comments they're making about price. I mean, it doesn't add up to me.
Well, I think the problem, Andrew, is you know, part of the you've got a service and a content environment for what we're delivering. And the content model at the moment is you can get it for free, or you can get it from online services who are delivering it for free. So the price model is being challenged, in my opinion, at the moment. So it is extremely valuable service to them, delivered in a way that they can use it in the best possible way. But at the moment, for a CEO, they don't read many of the clips. Most of the services they're wanting now is a 1 or 2 page summary of what happened today in the media and give me 1 or 2 of the most important stories. So, you know, the hard thing is it's content and services, and the service is part of the higher pricing environment. So it's a good discussion, and it's probably 11 o'clock over a beer sort of stuff, but it's also, you know, the price has been commoditised around the duplication of content and also the online services, in my opinion.
Okay. Irene?
I'd like to make a question also for John. How are snippets treated in Australia?
Online snippets? Or?
Yeah, online snippets.
Yeah. So definitely in Australia, we're in the situation at the moment that we can send headline, the snippet, with a link to a client, and at the current place at the moment, there's no copyright fee on that at the moment. We went to the publishers a year and a half ago and put some solutions in front of them, and they've agreed with those, but they just haven't been able to get the document done until they get their pricing models right for their paywalls. So we're pretty close, but we're happy to pay if we can get extensions to behind the paywall and to metadata. But if there are services out there who aren't going to pay, then obviously we become uncompetitive on price, or we could. So, but to answer your question, at the moment, we call it an extract with the link, but the link will always be there.
And of course,
just a question thing on it though, you know, from a usability of the client point of view, and I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but the rest of the information, they'll get a snippet, a summary or whatever, and then be able to drive straight down to the piece of information in the one report. With a snippet and then a link back to an online, you've taken them outside the report and they're having to go, they may not be online when they're actually looking at that report or whatever. So there are different areas of accessibility that works well for a client, which they'll be happy to pay for if it's better for them.
agree. I hear from clients all the time, on the URL on the snippet, I click on that URL and it's either stuck behind a paywall and I can't get the full text, so make it easier. I'm willing to pay, but just make it easier and accessible. So with that, I'll invite Irene to come up. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. I would like to first thank AMAC for the invitation to be here with you today. And I would also like to thank the audience for being here instead of enjoying beautiful Madrid. I'm going to try to give you an idea of the state of the press industry today. After hearing John, the situation in Spain is quite differently from that in Australia, and probably very different also from other Anglo-American countries. In Spain, we don't have a very big tradition on respecting IP rights. I'll give you my view. Well, as you probably know, Spain is facing a very important economic crisis that is affecting heavily the press industry. In 2007, we had 135 titles published every day. Today, we have 110 daily titles in Spain. For the very first time since the Spanish democracy started, we are being reduced the press titles that are published every day. And this is happening as a consequence of a dramatic fall in advertising revenues. In year 2007, the share of the press industry in the advertisement market was 1,460 million, and that figure has been reduced over 60% in year 2012, and it still is falling in the current year. We haven't found our floor yet. And as this happens, we have an increasing readership through internet, e-readers, smartphones, and conventional platforms. Publishers never had such a big readership with so little revenue. Dramatic situation. It's obvious that publishers need to build a new business model. We have very good things on our back. We have an increasing demand for good quality content. Studies show that the Spanish press has 43.2 credibility versus 20% credibility of television, and only 11% in the internet market. Now, what we need to do now is to develop new tools to monetize readership through content licensing agreements. And this obviously includes both aggregators and press clippers. I'm quite envious of the situation in Australia. When I heard John speaking, well, but it was in your presentation. Now, the situation in the Spanish market is that publishers only receive approximately €1.5 million from press cutting services. And this it comes because they are very reluctant to pay for the content they send to their clients. I seriously believe that, of course, publishers are somehow responsible for this conduct, because in the paper history, they were not very much aware of their IP rights. They were not concerned about protecting their IP rights. And only when the digital area came around and they saw that their content was widespread through intranets, and that those services were affecting seriously the number of subscriptions they receive, publishers started working to get a different model. Publishers in Spain are starting to work in paywalls. We don't have any paywalls nowadays in Spain. El Mundo, that is the second largest circulation newspaper here, will be putting the first paywall in practice, probably in the coming year. And we hope that other publishers will follow this path, because it's quite obvious also that if there is not a trend that forces all publishers to go into the paywall, it's very difficult that only one paywall can succeed. Another thing that publishers need to work very seriously is in obtaining a deep knowledge of their audience to commercialize behavioral advertisement and also to deliver those metadata that John was previously requesting from publishers. In Spain, probably, nowadays, publishers don't have a deep knowledge of their audience. They are starting to work on this, but still we are very far behind. And I believe also that we need to obtain this deep knowledge of our audience, this metadata, in a way that is aligned from all the publishers. You guys need to obtain the same information from the different editors. It's probably worthless if you receive different kinds of separate information from different publishers. You need to have a common structure so that you can go to your clients and have it delivered in a way that is worth it. The press industry is changing very quickly. As I said before, AEDE, many years ago, well, not so many years ago, maybe only 8 years ago, was not concerned about IP rights. I used to work for one of the most important publishing groups in Spain, and when we went to AEDE to ask them to work in IP rights, they just told us, this is of no interest. Editors are not concerned about this. Now the situation has changed quite a lot. Last year, AEDE brought criminal charge against ukiosk.com. That is a platform that used to deliver all newspapers PDF for free every day, and their PDFs were as good as the original ones. So the clients didn't feel there was a need to go and pay for those newspapers. Ukiosk made approximately 2 million euros revenue out of advertisement that was commercialized in their website. Also, AEDE is moving heavily to prosecute non-licensed press clippers. As I said before, I'm very jealous of the situation that John suggested in Australia, because here the market is so reduced. We have Acceso that is supporting the journey that is taking place today, that is one of the legal press clippers, the first one to recognize the editor's IP rights. And from this platform, I want to thank them very heavily, because we believe that there will be putting attendance into the market, and hopefully their action and also the lawsuits that AEDE is starting will lead the market to a proper regulation. But of course, this is not about prosecuting breach of IP rights. What we need to do is to develop a good licensing strategy that provides users legal ways to access content. And this comes through internet, through e-readers, And as far as press clippers are concerned, Cedro is going to play a very crucial role. Now, when I said before that 8 years ago, I went to AEDE to ask them for protection in IP rights, and they told me that they were not going to do anything because they were not interested in this matter. Publishers were not interested in this matter. I took my phone and rang my competitors and proposed them to build a new company that was called Gede Prensa that would lead all the commercialization of editors' IP rights for press clippers. The model did not work out for competition reasons, that after many years, courts stated that the first rulings were not fair, and they gave us the legal solution when it was already too late to work on it because we had dismissed the company. And now what AEDE is trying to do is to motivate our affiliates so that they give their rights for press clippers to Cedro, because we heavily believe that the industry needs to gather IP rights from the same place. So if the industry needs to go to different publishers, and we'll find that in every window you will find different conditions with different contracts, the cost of transaction is going to be so high that you are not going to be interested in it. So we are trying to build a model where you will go to one step, and in that one step you will find everything you want. And this means IP rights and also the content itself. We are not prepared yet to deliver metadata. But it's a very interesting question that I will take from today and will propose it to my affiliates. Also, we are working very actively in the last months to promote a regulatory obligation for aggregators to compensate publishers for the use of their content. And here, of course, I'm not going to say the company in which we are thinking, but you can imagine it by yourself. We need to implement tools to build commercial databases for an enhanced understanding of our readers. We really need to work aligned. The press industry needs you, and you need the press industry. We need to find models that work out and that recognize the value that content gives to your technology. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Irene. I think we'd all agree that the legal solution is not the solution for the industry. However, technology has made it so easy to just go out on the web and facilitate, the scraping, disseminating, et cetera, of content. And I think that it behooves us, both AMEC as well as the publishers, really need to educate our clients that content is not free. Google Alerts, that's something I hear, everywhere I go that that clients are using, and there is this mindset that content is free. So I think in parallel, we really do also need to educate our clients on copyright. Are there any specific questions for Irene before we move on? We do want to work with you and not the legal solution. Okay. Susanna?
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Amy, for inviting Cedro to participate in this workshop. I think between Irene and me, you're gonna fly back home with a sad feeling of what is happening in Spain. So that's why I would like to start my presentation by trying to think about the reasons of the situation that are going through Spanish newspapers nowadays, and try to think together whether the reason for this is that they are developing a business model that was built in 1833 and that has not changed yet. According to the book A History of News, the turning point for newspaper was precisely held in 1833. It was the 3rd of September when appeared a new newspaper, a penny newspaper, that was built to people who had never bought newspapers because of its cost. In 2 years, this newspaper, The Sun, was selling 15,000 copies a day, and the most popular one at that time, it was New York's Courier and Enquirer, sold 4,500 copies a day. This was a turning point, of course, because it introduced a new business model to the industry. The large circulation of this newspaper attracted advisors, and the revenue enabled The Sun to keep the price down and its circulation, of course, up. But instead of relying mostly on selling copies, newspaper became dependent mostly on advertising. At that time, it was a win-win relationship. Readers got their news cheap, advertisers could reach a large audience easily, and newspapers had benefits to afford new investments. And it seems that this model has worked up until the internet era. Irene was saying the same before. The influence and scope of newspapers in the internet era has increased. The audience is bigger than ever. So what is the problem for newspaper? Why are they in danger? It seems clearly that it's a revenue problem. What happened particularly in Spain? In the middle of the 90s, almost every newspaper in Spain decided to give free access to online content through internet, probably expecting that investment through advertisement was going to be enough to recover this. But advertising didn't bring enough revenue to maintain newspapers for several reasons. There are billions of pages on the internet, so the value of each individual page is lower than that we have from a print page. And advertisers cannot measure the effectiveness of these advertisements, so they can also realize that maybe they have been paying too much. Maybe when we have targeted audiences, what we know who are we facing, we get more money, we get more value from advertising again. But maybe it's not fast enough for Spanish newspapers to fill the gap opened up by the decline in revenue from print advertising and circulation. At the same time, subscriptions to print edition decrease, and income from advertising hasn't been high enough. So the slow and steady fall has been propelled in Spain by the current economic crisis. A decade ago, only specialist providers of business news seemed to be able to get people to pay for online news. It seems that users were not ready to pay for something that they could reach freely. In fact, at the same time that specialist providers were trying and were succeeding in models with not free access to content, many general sites tried, but they have to open again their content without any kind of restriction to attract as many visitors and advertisers as possible. On top of that, in countries like Spain, that maybe you're also aware of that, there is a strong social trend in favor of copyleft systems and free access. And it seems very difficult for publishers to be able to break this habit. So, have they lost any opportunity to receive revenue through internet? Of course, I think the answer is no. Maybe we should take for granted that no one is going to pay for easily reachable content, but daily newspapers are trying to monetize through different means. Business and finance information covered behind paywalls. Some publishers using metered paywalls where visitors can read up to 10 to 20 to 30 stories. And then the beauty of the system is that you are not putting off casual users, so you can also have money from advertisement. And many publications are adopting what they call all-access model, so you pay for the print edition, but you receive any access for any kind of digital edition that the publisher may have developed. So where is hope is when the print edition doesn't exist anymore, the user is completely used to understand the value of digital content and be able to pay for this. So it seems that newspapers in Spain are really struggling to survive. They are going through a very difficult situation. They are in financial danger. But what they feel is that there are new players in the market using their content and that they are succeeding. So at this stage, what I like to do is to give you an example of a model that we have worked together with the publishers, and we think that from the same legal situation brings a very different practical model that is based on the cooperative work between users, in this specific case, press clippers, and Cedro as an intermediary for newspapers. To understand this example, it's necessary to give you just a little bit of legal context. And starting in 2006, we have a very important amendment in the Intellectual Property Act because it was explicitly include a provision to allow remuneration for commercial press clipping that was not included until that moment. It was like yesterday, 2006. PCAs were also obliged to ask for permission to use articles for press clipping. Theoretically, it was a very important step, but what has happened in the practice? The global market, every newspaper, Irene was talking about a market of 1,005,100 nowadays. Today, if you take the revenue that each publisher is receiving, we can talk about 800,000 in total in the market for this press clipping activity. So why we think, regardless the legislation we have at the precise moment, it is important to work together to shape business models. What happened to have this amendment in law and receive so small revenue in global? Well, as Irene said, in Spain, there are more than 100 newspapers, and they are completely different from each other in terms of size, in terms of circulation. There is a very big range of small local newspapers. So it's not likely that these newspapers have team management big enough to be dealing with agreements with PCAs. On the other hand, apart from Kantar or Accessor, the top big companies that are working here, there is also a wide range of small ones for which it's quite difficult to manage permissions for every newspaper. It's not just that they want it or they do not. It's also difficult for them to be heard by newspaper publishers. So there is a first step, the direct business that PCA should bring to publishers, but then we think that there is a very important second step on that, and it's the subsequent internal use of articles included in press clippings that is done by the final user, by the PCA client, that is not being monetized at all by PCAs for newspapers publishers in Spain. That's the reason why, apart from the revenue newspaper publishers are getting, we think that they do not see PCAs nowadays as an ally, but they see them as a threat because they kind of lose control of their content when they provide PCAs with PDF or XML or any kind of access to their content, and then they do not monetize that content, but they also lose control on that. So the organization I represent, Cedro, we are an intermediary between newspapers and PCAs after have not been able to succeed with Gede Prensa. And we have what we want to do is to put forward a system that is based on negotiation, on cooperation, on working together. Being a professional intermediary, just working with the only purpose of reaching agreements with PCAs on behalf of right holders, but also collaborating with them, because we need to establish control mechanisms together so that every use of newspaper is remunerated and press publishers don't think that they are losing control anymore, but also to use them to provide the end user with a license that allows the internal distribution of press clipping while publishers are getting an appropriate remuneration for that. The estimation for this business model we have put forward in Spain is 7 million for newspaper publishers instead of the 800,000 we were talking about before. What we think is that if we help publishers to monetize their content with this kind of shaped products together, they will consider us as an ally. And legal solutions, of course, will help us to develop maybe new business or to know where each other should be. We need to talk about anyone more. But what we should do now is to think, is there any other measures that we should agree together to shape new business models? Should we learn from what we did in other countries? We are in 2006 and learning from what UK or France did years ago, Australia also. Maybe it's time to work together and not be like in North Africa anymore.
Thank you. Thank you, Susanna. I mean, clearly, we would like nothing better than a licensing organization that went cross borders. Then you can see how complicated it is, country by country in terms of whether it's copyright or whether the rights organizations are testing different models. So maybe one of the learnings coming out of this session or next step could be how do we figure out more cross-border rather than all the individual. Any questions for Susanna? Yes. She's coming. Just give her a second.
Yeah. I'm Joachim from FIBEP, so the Global Monitoring Analysis Association. When I hear you, especially it's a question, both of you, Irene and Susan from the Spanish licensing organization. Actually, within the monitoring world, most of the subjects that you treated from the basis have been treated, like John said, for over 15 years. Stronger and stronger in some countries, less in others. A lot of the solutions, they are in our pockets. So your last question is the solution. Benchmark within PDLN, probably within your own organization. There are a lot of solutions, but of course it's a long way. Probably the problem is a bit younger in Spain than it has been in Britain or in Belgium, the first countries where it has been solutioned. I'm sure Andrew will speak about it a little bit. It's a long way, but it's not, on the other side, it's not a threat. It should not be a threat. But to get it a partner, it needs a lot of time, and it needs first steps to build up. So we can only tell you from the monitoring organization, put up the first steps, and there will be will, even if it doesn't look like. It's a long way. And if in Spain you go that way now, there are a lot of others who have been successful. Britain is an example, Belgium, Germany, France, Scandinavian countries, where the rules are working. They're not best, like John said it, but it's a working basis, and we are more in cooperation terms and no more threats one to the other.
Yeah, I think in Spain we should take into consideration two things. On one side, it's true that we are a young market in terms of having developed a good system for monitoring companies or PCAs, but I just commented, but maybe we should elaborate a little bit more on that to be aware of what the Spanish market is, about the strong social trend against copyright. It's been really an issue in Spain regarding not just newspaper content, but also in education, regarding new procedures to go against piracy. Piracy is understood as censorship in Spain. And we have demonstrations in the street when the government tried to amend the law to include speedier ways to go against pirates. So it's important in both, the importance of collaborating with PCAs and with companies is twofold. It's remuneration, of course, but it's also getting to the final user. It's also getting people to know that every system that is able to measure the importance of a marketing company in the media has been this or that, but that this content should be remunerated at all stages of the commercial relationship. So it's not, remuneration is very important, as I said, but there is a bigger problem now in Spain. There is a social one that I think we should really work to turn the other way around.
Anything else?
I'd like to make a comment also.
Okay.
When we first started dealing with IP rights and we built up GedePrensa, we looked at international models. And GedePrensa was pretty much based on the model that is working in UK. And what we found is a very heavy position of the press clipping industry against GedePrensa, not because the model was not good, but because it was the first time that the industry need to pay for content. So the industry pushed heavily antitrust authorities against this model, and they reached a first resolution that was against the project. When the collective model did not work out, editors started suing individually press clippers. And then press clippers came around and said, hey, guys, this doesn't work. If we need to go door by door to obtain a different contract from each of you, it's just a matter that we cannot manage. So they claim again to have a collective solution to be applied. And those were very tough moments, not because we didn't look internationally what had worked out outside Spain, but because the position of the industry was very much against paying for content. And another difficulty that the industry faces when the publishers try to monetize their content is that final users are usually heavy advertisers. So those heavy advertisers don't feel they need to pay an extra amount for the content they receive.
Okay, I think a number of press clipping services, as I look around, are paying for content. So there are good actors in the space, and it does go to educating the market and the industry. With that, I'll ask Andrew to come up.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Andrew Hughes. For those who don't know me, I'm from the UK Newspaper Licensing Agency. I also wear a hat for something called the Press Database and Licensing Network, which is our equivalent of FIBE-BAMEC, I guess. I really think the economics are fascinating to stay with, and to some extent I'll talk to those rather than this slide. I think it's really important to follow the money, like in a murder mystery. It's money or sometimes sex, but if you follow the money, you understand a lot, and I think Isabella painted a very good picture of the extreme pressure that publishers are under. I think a sense of total value is always very useful. If you want to understand the person on the other side of the table, if I want to understand you, I probably have to know more than I do already about how your business model works and the pressures that you're under. You need to understand what pressure publishers are under. Isabella set that out, and that pressure gets more extreme. In terms of total value, the NLA has been established now for 17 years, I think, or more in the UK, and has a fairly benign legislative setup and the support of the agencies. The NLA is generating for UK newspapers about 25 million, 30 million euros, if you like. Put that in the context of what that means to an individual newspaper, and you might be talking about 1% or maybe 1.5% of their total income. And they are going through into kind of free fall revenue. So getting and keeping their attention is hard work. But to echo the point that was made, is when you actually came up in our recent Meltwater Copyright Tribunal case, it's when you are paying, as nearly everybody in the room here is, copyright fees, you end up in a situation where your interests and our interests are rather more aligned. The NLA now gets very concerned if the UK media monitoring industry is having problems, because if you're having problems, we're having problems. We're tied together, and that's, I think, a good thing. And we're equally tied together in a paid content model. And our great way to unite anyone in publishing is to start using the G word, Google. But, I mean, paid versus free. We're in the paid content business too. The really tough thing is, I think most of us know that, and then, you know, how do you actually go further and build those bridges that really work? I was going to talk a little bit more about the global situation that Dawn referenced. Some stats for you to cut up and take away. I won't read them out, but basically international is, we think, increasingly important and will continue to be important. And finding international solutions to these problems is something which fascinates me. It's important to us. The UK press, because we all speak American now, the UK press is probably read more internationally than a lot of things. And so it's very important to us to try and engineer solutions to the challenge of international. I think if you narrow down from the macro and the advertising collapse and the readership collapse, I think it also presents real challenges for organizations like the NLA, because the licensing models where they have evolved in the countries where they've evolved successfully tend to be focused on an appropriate solution for local conditions, recognizing all the many influences that might drive the situation that John described in Australia or the situation in the UK or whatever. But those models, when I look across different organizations licensing, those models tend to be focused on the fact that the local user of content will be getting most value from that content. And valuing that international use is incredibly complicated. To a significant extent, as someone from Transition was telling me in the corridor, well, if you get something from another country in your media monitoring, it's probably not that interesting or relevant, and therefore it shouldn't be valued very highly. But on the other hand, you know, the key bit of information internationally is important, and winnowing out from a much larger pool the relevant item, which is the work that you do and need to be paid for, shouldn't mask out the fact that the publishers have got to be paid too. Obviously, web has driven international access higher and fundamentally reduced control. And I think control and transparency are kind of two words that you should keep thinking about if you're trying to engineer solutions in this area. Publishers get very anxious when they lose control. Giving them transparency on what's happening to their data is the best way you can of reassuring them that the relatively small numbers of users that most media monitoring companies are serving aren't going to interfere with their wider advertiser, consumer-focused businesses. A big challenge as you try and build international solutions is that the licensing bodies in different countries are very often relatively weak. There's a tradition of copyright licensing internationally through an organization called IFRO, which is focused on organization which, generally speaking, grew out of science and technical publishing, particularly in the educational sector. What you guys do for a living and newspapers are a bit of a mystery to this crew, and it means that they don't have models. And US is a classic example of that. CCC, world's biggest RRO, generating $250 million a year. Do they understand press cuttings? Do they have a solution for press cuttings companies? No. Have we tried to get them to put one together? Yes, we have. But that transparency point is critical, because persuading someone who's getting a relatively small sum of money, who's desperately looking for new revenue sources and seeking to monetize everything that he can, that you will just give him a contract and give him a small share of money, possibly a revenue share model. I think anyone who's done publishing licensing agreements will know revenue share works great. Well, it doesn't work great, but it works relatively well for the person distributing it, but you're getting a percentage. And I've seen publishers coming back from meetings, dare I say, with LexisNexis and Factiva, feeling really, really excited because they've got 35, 40% revenue share. They never, which is a lot more than most people in the room are paying. They never ask percentage of what, and that's a very important question. I'll leave you to think on that. The NLA is wedded from the outset, and I was involved right at the beginning of the NLA, and at that stage I worked for the FT, and the FT owned a press cuttings agency, and we used that to drive the model, and we saw that as being key to getting a solution to market, and we still believe that's really true in the UK, and we believe that's true internationally. Good thing about international is that it's forced us to develop that model and work much more through the MMOs. So our Eclipse International agreement, which we launched about 2 or 3 years ago, it's a howls of anguish when people saw the price, but has actually worked out pretty well. We've got about 1,600 corporate users. Those are corporate users, not end users, and about 16 licensed MMOs. And the idea there is, although customers have a direct relationship, contractual relationship with us, that's executed online. The MMO collects the money. We believe in operating through you, in partnership with you, rather than the slightly more triangulated relationship we have in the UK. And to some extent, what we do internationally, if it's successful, is going to feed back into what we're doing in the UK. We're developing that, so a news story for you. It's not really a news story because it's happening over the next month or so. Is we're releasing a new version of that license, and we're adding in web, print, and full UK coverage to Eclipse International. That touches on a problem which is crucial as you look at this difference between international use of your content and domestic uses. How do you differentiate those markets, and how do you segment those markets and create license models that allow you to operate internationally and in the UK without disturbing what is our core business, which is most of which is sat in the second row there. And the answer is that volume of use internationally is relatively low, and that allows us to create a segmented license structure based on low volume. But the key things in that, going back to how can we persuade publishers to participate in this, and I have to go and sell this to publishers, is that we need transparency. We need higher quality reporting, who's getting content, how much they're getting, which is where our links model comes from. And we believe that transparency creates the trust which is necessary. I want to talk a little bit, I think we're running out of time, so I'll keep it brief, so there's time for questions about PDLN. Many of you may have heard of it, many of you won't. It's the Press Database and Licensing Network. It's a trade body for NLA-like organizations, which we were involved in setting up about 5 years ago. And essentially, like any trade body, we get together to share ideas and drink beer. And it's working pretty well. We're drinking beer in Stockholm next week. It'll be expensive beer. But what we like about PDLN, and Susanna will be coming to talk to us about the Spanish experience, is that it's developing momentum. It's grown. We've got, I think there's an extra new member. I think Sweden is, or is it Finland, in addition to the ones I've listed there, coming in just this year. The goals are very much to, it's written into our constitution on our website, pdln.info, to support the MMOs as distributors of content. And we are trying very hard to, as I think, I forget who said, to see what we can do to simplify licensing and content supply. If we can drive down transaction costs, it might make it possible to work more effectively internationally, because it's a mess at the moment. a really difficult mess. It's a mess partly because there are so many different business models. PDLN members range from OPoint at one end, who are an aggregator, to pure licensing players who might be focused more on other ends of the market. And getting them to work together requires lots of beer, and but also a clear head the next day when you sit down and try and work. We have a program called PDLN Connect, which has been very much about trying to develop 7 threads of standardization, and particularly a reporting. And going back to one of the earlier comments, putting the user first from John, I think it's just so important. If we lose track of that, we go mad. So we've certainly invited AMEC and FIBEP representatives to talk to us at each of our meetings, and we try and make sure that users do too. And in our Connect program, the thing we're focusing hardest on at the moment, progress has been slow, is can we create an end-user license which could be used by any PDLN member, which would allow you, when you're putting license agreements in front of clients, to put one standard agreement in front of clients. But we're also looking at reporting. We've got something we can roll out there fairly shortly. We're looking at data delivery standards. And we certainly we have been in discussion with Joachim, with Jeremy, and with others at trying to get informed MMO reaction to the ideas that we have. How do we move forward? Well, it's very, very challenging. I think it's as I say, horribly complex stuff, relatively small sums of money. Keeping everyone's focus on progress is tough. But I think the most important thing is respect. We have a lot of respect, PDLN and certainly NLA, for media monitoring, media evaluation companies. We recognize what you do. We recognize who you do it for, the biggest companies in the world. We respect what you do. It's important that you respect and understand what we need, which is to monetize content effectively, to make sure we have a story that we can sell to publishers. Shared a stage at AMEC in Barcelona 3 years ago with FT. And when FT left the NLA effectively, I think everyone realized that there's one thing worse than dealing with a licensing body, it's dealing with every newspaper individually. But we're open for engagement. We welcome feedback, we welcome ideas, we welcome questions. Thank you very much.
Any questions for Andrew? I know we only have a few minutes. Yes, go ahead, Jeremy.
Andrew, I think you hit the nail on the head. It is a mess, but it was a mess 3 years ago when we had the same debate. And very sorry not to be on the panel today. I've enjoyed it, but we don't seem to have made any progress, and we're still having the same old fights. And you said same old discussions, and you said there's not much money at stake. So why don't we be brave and try something radical? Because content doesn't flow easily across borders. Those big multinationals that you say we serve are getting fed up of our inability to provide a quality service, and ultimately we'll get left behind unless we address this. I don't know what the answer is, and I appreciate it's challenging, but we don't seem to make the progress we'd like.
I think the answer on both sides is that it's a relatively, although it's important, it's been a relatively small sum of money. If we each put more time into it, we come up with better solutions faster. I do think there has been progress, actually. I think, if nothing else, the NLA is established in the UK, and AP have established in the States that, your competitors using free web content, not paying license fees, are licensable. I think there have been, Cedro is up and running now with a Spanish solution. That wasn't the case. Promopress in Italy are up and running with a solution. That wasn't the case. I mean, organizations are being formed to address certainly the domestic issues in many countries. Progress needs to go a lot faster. It's only going to go faster when I'm not spending half my day reading copyright tribunal papers from Meltwater, and you're not doing whatever you do when you're not talking to me about international content. So 2 to tango on that one. There are no magic solutions. A lot of work's got to be done for a relatively small reward, and that's the challenge. That's the real challenge.
I think with the possible exception of Meltwater, there's plenty of mutual respect. Right. I don't think that is the issue. I think the challenge is if you talk to a big multinational client, and content just kind of feeds what most of the organisation here does. It's the kind of, it primes the pump that helps us collect the data that ultimately delivers the insight, which is what our customers are really interested in. They want to know what's important. They don't want to see everything, I think, as John was saying. But if you go to them today and try and put together a service for them, if you had a sheet of A3 and you created a menu of all the different content sets around the world and all the different frameworks and all the different pricing structures and the price points themselves, it's impossible to sell that. And I think that's the challenge. So I would urge us to speed up our discussions. I'm sure Dawn is going to now take this on, and I'm sure she'll drink less beer than you in Stockholm.
There you go. Yeah.
Or maybe not, I don't know. But
Better be good wine in Stockholm.
anyway, I'll shut up.
Okay.
Andrew, yes. You know, in PDLN, EMIC and FIBEP talks, we are invited to share a part when half an hour on afternoon. We have to go further in the dialogue. And I share absolutely what Jeremy is saying. Today we have licenses which are yesterday's licenses. We have to push. We are in dialogue, but we are rarely in the dialogue we should be. Of course, there are countries which are even a step behind, but we have all to push. So I think we have to push our trust. There are a few trustful relations. We have to build on these ones to push all the train, and quickly. This is really our job.
Agree. I mean, I do think that, pardon me? No, I was just going to say that I do agree. I think our paths are more aligned, than you think, which is the title of this. There may be a few exceptions out there, but for the most part, as I look around, at least those representatives of the media monitoring company are trying to, have been licensing and are working towards just trying to figure it out. And we do have to make it simple for our clients. They are global. We can't go individually. It's both time-consuming and cost-prohibitive. So I do hope that we move forward. If we can get it right with the newspaper industry, which mostly today we have focused on the newspaper publishers, and Andrew said that he's been doing this for 17 years. I mean, we've got to move this forward. We still have broadcast and video and social data that is rapidly, and that we haven't even touched today. So hopefully we can move this forward. I know that we only have just a couple more minutes, but I just want to make sure that we've addressed questions. Okay. In light of the time that we're out of time, I'm just going to do a quick announcement. Thank you all for engaging and listening and staying for this. I do think that we've come a long way between the publishers and the media monitoring organizations, and we do want to work together, and we do want to figure out what that model is that we can simple. And hopefully by next year at AMIC, we will come back with actual models that are working beyond what we have today. So we're now breaking for a networking break on the roof. There are hostesses outside that can direct you. Again, you probably know the lift situation better than anybody at this point, but you can go directly to floor 7, and there are others around that you can go to floor 6 and then go up. We do resume at 16:45 military time with 2 one-hour business clinics, and we hope that you will engage in those clinics. I know they're at the end of the day, but I'm sure our speakers would appreciate that. So thank you very much, and thanks to the panel.